Dillian the Body Snatcher White here. It's a champ. Big up to Sporting Icon. Subscribe. Otherwise, I might pay you guys a visit.
So as I said yesterday, with the potential of Dillian Whyte choosing between Luis Ortiz and Kubrat Pulev, so Kubrat Pulev IBF route or Luis Ortiz for WBC. Now, of course, the WBC, which is pretty much what I said, that may be the reason why that they kind of haven't reached an agreement with Kubrat Pulev, is because they're waiting for a resolution from the WBC over the whole mandatory situation, considering that Dominic Brazil is now, according to the WBC, a official mandatory, even though he's ranked number 2 behind Dillian Whyte, and Dillian Whyte has been doing eliminators holding the WBC silver title. And he's done all this with the pretense that the WBC have said to him that when the time comes, you will either be installed as mandatory or you will go into a final eliminator. And the Dominic Brazil versus Eric Molina fight was not for the mandatory position. And Eddie Hearn and many other people have the official confirmation of that from WBC President Mauricio Sulaiman. So, and as I said yesterday, maybe they're going to go to court, all that kind of thing. So it appears that this will be the first stage of it if they can't reach a resolution. And this is what Eddie Hearn told Sky Sports. We're going to appeal the WBC decision to install Dominic Brazil as the mandatory. WBC President Mauricio Sulaiman said that he would talk about it this week and maybe post a resolution. We don't mind fighting Ortiz, but it has to be for the mandatory, not to be the second mandatory behind a guy who has never fought an eliminator and who is behind Whyte in the rankings. It's outrageous. If Joshua doesn't fight Wilder and Wilder ends up fighting Brazil, if Wilder fights Brazil, he doesn't need to be the mandatory. But Wilder's team will want Brazil to be the mandatory because there isn't much credibility in the fight. Let that fight be a voluntary, then the winner of Whyte Ortiz is the mandatory. But also, we've got purse bids next week for Whyte versus Kubrat Pulev. Everything is up in the air, but within the next 10 days of those things will be a lot clearer. So that was Eddie Hearn's statement. So basically what they're doing is they are appealing against the WBC, where they have been promising him the WBC mandatory or to be in a position to fight for the final elimination to become the WBC mandatory, which is why he's been defending the WBC title, which is why he was granted permission to fight Robert Helenius for this title, why he was granted permission to fight Lucas Brown for this title, because they've been paying the sanction fees with the promise that these things will happen. But of course, Dominic Brazil, personally, I think a lot of this is down to the whole Wilder and Brazil history, which happened in Alabama, which we won't go into. And I believe there's some kind of out-of-court settlement that if Deontay Wilder gives Dominic Brazil a voluntary shot, then Dominic Brazil will drop the case, or maybe the case already been dropped, or maybe one won and the other didn't. I'm not entirely clued up on that one. But for me, that could be one of the reasons. And the WBC are upholding that to help out their guy. Of course, they've been helping out Wilder for years now. They've been protecting him from all the top opposition. They've been strategically placing the rankings so he never has to do it. It took him 3 years to do a damn mandatory. That is absolutely outrageous. Of course, he was supposed to fight Povetkin before. Not entirely his fault, of course, or not really his fault at all, except for the fact he did run away when Povetkin was within the legal limit of his failed PED test. But still, anyway. Dillian Whyte deserves to be either the mandatory or fight for the final eliminator to be the mandatory, whether that's Dominic Brazil, whether that's Luis Ortiz, whether that's Joseph Parker, whoever it is. Dillian Whyte needs to be in that fight. Nobody should be installed as mandatory above him. If they really want Dominic Brazil to be the mandatory, then quite simple. Schedule a fight between Dominic Brazil and Dillian Whyte. And the winner becomes the official mandatory. Luis Ortiz has just lost to Deontay Wilder. So again, there's an argument to be had right there. Now, for me, a lot of people would love to see Dillian Whyte get in there with Luis Ortiz. That'll be a great fight. For me, I would favour Dillian Whyte quite heavily in that fight. I believe he's got the tools to outbox and beat Luis Ortiz, keeping him at range and ultimately letting go of that left hand. But anyway, if that fight happens, we'll break it down. Now, of course, there'll be a lot of people who will say that Luis Ortiz will walk through Dillian Whyte. Okay, and you know what? That's absolutely fine. You're entitled to your opinion, which is what makes this fight a must. For me, as a fan, of course, Dillian Whyte versus Kubrat Pulev or Dillian Whyte versus Luis Ortiz, I would choose Luis Ortiz, based on the fact that's a great fight and for the fact he will get more credit for that win than what he would over Kubrat Pulev from the general boxing public, because the general boxing public don't really know too much about Kubrat Pulev, even though he is crazy dangerous and very, very good. Only ever lost one fight to Vladimir Klitschko, but most people consider Luis Ortiz to be one of the top guys, even though he hasn't been for quite some time. But anyway, but of course, even if Dillian Whyte did fight and beat Luis Ortiz, whether he beat him on points, knockout, whatever it was, you know, the Wilder protectors will say that Dillian Whyte only beat Luis Ortiz because Wilder took his soul, you know, because Wilder already beat him. You know the excuses will come, but for me, I don't care. I want to see this fight. I'm sure you guys want to see this fight, and good on Eddie Hearn and good on Dillian Whyte for appealing this decision by the WBC. And if you don't get a satisfactory resolution, then I suggest you go sue them, which is what I'm pretty sure they will do, because they have been paying sanction fees for holding the WBC title unnecessarily. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see what happens. So drop your thoughts below, click your thumbs up, subscribe. Catch you next video.